Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pill with Dr. Will. I'm Will Solomon, your host today, and I'm really excited today to have with me two guests on the show that really are very close to me in many ways because we work together on a continual basis here at the ACMA, the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. So please join me in welcoming Parth Patel, who's our senior full stack developer. Welcome, Parth. And Dr. Kiana Dixon. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Will. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to have you guys. So, for those of you guys that don't know, I am the founder and the CEO of the ACMA, again, the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. It's the accrediting body, the first and only accrediting body for the industry, for the pharma life sciences space. And so, Kiana, Parth, and I, we work closely together. And a lot of times we get questions about what's happening in the industry. It could be anything related to digital technology and AI, all the way to what's happening with pharmacists and their careers and the industry as a whole. So, based on that request for from you guys and from the audience, we thought it'd be a good idea to get the experts on the show and kind of talk about that a little bit more detail. So for the audience out there that doesn't know Parth and Kiana, Parth, maybe tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Will mentioned, my name is Parth. I'm the senior full stack engineer, and I've been here with the ACMA for a while. I would say about 4 years now. And really, my focus throughout these years has been to elevate the digital side of the ACMA, the tech sectors of it. And recently, as everyone's radar is in AI, that's kind of where a lot of my focuses are also laid out as well. So really a big emphasis on AI at the moment at the
Yeah,
ACMA.
thank you, Parth. Yeah, we're doing some cool things with AI that we're building. Can't let out all the secrets just yet, but we'll definitely get into that and talk about that. I know a lot of people have questions about that, and Parth is an expert in this area. And then also, Dr. Kiana Dixon, maybe if you could just tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Kiana. Again, I'm a pharmacist, actually, by background and by training. I received my doctorate in pharmacy from Florida A&M. Before then, I was an undergrad for chemistry. And now I'm the life sciences associate with ACMA. I'm doing the definition of something non-traditional. By working as a life sciences associate at the ACMA. Since being here about a year and a half now, we really work on a lot of new board certifications that I'm seeing all eyes are on. Again, medical affairs, AI, like Parth mentioned, and biologics and biosimilars, something I'm super passionate about as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hot area. I was having a discussion this morning with an industry leader about this issue of biologics and biosimilars, and we'll definitely talk about that as well and kind of what's happening in the industry. So I guess, my first question to you guys is kind of what led you into the spaces that you're in today. So Kiana, maybe we start with you. As a pharmacist, most pharmacists, I think if the audience is not familiar, most pharmacists go and typically work in retail pharmacy. When we say retail, we mean working at a pharmacy chain, at a Walgreens, a CVS. That's what I think when people think of a pharmacist, they think of the person kind of behind the counter, right? And they're doing something that not everybody really understands what they're doing, right? Secretly back there. It's definitely must be more than just counting the pills. So that's kind of how I think what people think of when they think of the pharmacist. Although, pharmacists in the U.S. are actually one of the most trusted healthcare providers, among the lay public. How did you end up kind of in this role now at the ACMA where you're kind of working in a very unique space? And what are you seeing in terms of the trends that are happening for pharmacists in the industry as a whole?
Wow, that's a lot. Thinking back to why I even went to pharmacy school in the first place, I've always looked beyond the pill, right? Look beyond the pill, really, beyond the traditional image of a pharmacist. Like I mentioned, my undergrad is in chemistry. And how I came about pharmacy school, it was never on my radar, anything medical really. But I actually had a professor. He was my PChem professor, my physical chemistry professor, and his wife was a nuclear pharmacist. So it was kind of, you can use science, you can also use math a lot in this role. I think it would be interesting for you. And that was really what motivated me to go to pharmacy school.
Mm.
Throughout pharmacy school, if you know anything about pharmacy, nuclear pharmacy is the complete opposite of CVS. While we know there's a CVS or a retail pharmacy on literally any block where you go, nuclear pharmacy is something way smaller. So it was hard for me to gain experience, right? So I did work in those retail pharmacies. I worked at Publix Pharmacy for a while. And within that, I was the traditional pharmacist, right? I was the traditional pharmacy intern. Those, when you think of the common pharmacist, that was me. But as I began matriculating through pharmacy school, I wanted to find something that best suited me, right? There's a lot of pharmacists that we're aware of who are at the counter at a retail pharmacy, community pharmacy. There are also pharmacists at the hospital. They work along other side specialty areas. But for me, I wanted something that was more project based. That was something that I was good at. I was really good at educating others, trying to make something that's super complicated, right? Like super complicated technique, like a mechanism of action, and kind of putting it more into layman's terms, making that switch to make it more understandable, right? Science doesn't have to be that hard. And that was my purpose. We have within any area of the medical field, you have direct patient care and you have indirect patient care. I worked in the direct patient care, but I found that indirectly having an impact on patients indirectly is what suited me the best. And I started looking at more roles, right? Those that are in medical education. I started looking at other areas in medical affairs. As I started exploring more, I started to realize how much pharmacists are valued along the entire healthcare continuum, not just in the direct patient care, dealing with them at the counter, dealing with them at the hospital bed. We see them again along the continuum before a drug even hits the shelf. Right. So that's where my expertise, my brain started becoming triggered as to what else I could do. Right. I knew what I was good at, what is out there for me as a pharmacist that I can marry that with. And I found that in medical affairs and in medical education. And that's exactly what ACMA does. Right. We marry the science and we marry medical affairs, having that indirect patient care and that impact into one. And that's how I came here. That's why we're here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really well put, and I kind of like how you went through the whole journey. So you grew up, I think, in Atlanta, correct?
I actually grew up in South Georgia. I live in Atlanta now. I'm from Thomasville, Georgia. I'll probably say that. Everyone will probably have to look it up because no one ever knows Thomasville, Georgia, but it's a really small town in South Georgia.
Okay. How far is that from Atlanta?
About 4 hours.
Oh wow. Okay, so it's
It's
quite
far.
a ways. So it's like
Right.
it's a little small town. I would assume like
Mhm.
a rural kind of small town. It sounds like.
It
Are you
is.
the first pharmacist in your family?
I am. I'm the first anyone in my family that had a doctorate level degree. So
Wow.
that's where it all started. My parents, they went to college, they received their undergrads, but just taking it a step further is what we see in my family.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, I'm sure your parents are really proud of the fact that you got a doctorate degree. You're really the first healthcare professional in the family, it sounds like. That's great. When you told your family you wanted to work in, as a pharmacist, I would imagine, just like a lot of people, they probably imagined you working like in a hospital, right? Or some type of retail settings. When you said to them, I'm going to work in industry, what were their thoughts out of curiosity?
To this day, again, I've worked in this area for about 2 years now. They still don't know what I really do. So they go around and they're so proud. They're the ones that are on Facebook. Oh, my daughter, my baby, she's a pharmacist, and so they still ask me, to this day, questions, right? Really a lot of questions, tiny questions of how long will this drug stay in my body? My drug is expired and has been expired for the last 3 months. Can I still take it? They still ask me those patient level questions
Right.
because they don't understand that I'm still not in that area. So every day is a fight as to what I actually do. Right. So within me being their own daughter, they're still not clearly understanding what I do and the impact that I have. You can just imagine the confusion when you try to explain to others, yes, I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not that type of pharmacist.
Right, right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, as a PhD, it's like I'm a doctor, but I'm not that type of doctor, right? It's
Right.
kind of the same
Right.
thing, right? It's you guys are younger than me, but there was an episode like that with Ross, who was a PhD. He was one of the characters in Friends, the show Friends, and he's a PhD, but when the parents come to meet him, his potential future in-laws, he's like, I'm a doctor, but not that type of doctor. And so that kind of became
Right.
a big joke among PhDs. But yeah, I think people don't realize there's a lot of different types of positions you can have as a pharmacist. And I think what I've seen is this area has changed massively in the last decade. I remember myself when I started in the pharmaceutical industry, there weren't that many pharmacists, and there really wasn't, what we call today a medical affairs function. It was really, just a specialty sales role that a lot of pharmacists would have. So they'd work in sales and then they might transition to become in the specialty sales role. They only focused on one therapeutic area or one drug. But even then, it was far few in between. I don't think there was a lot of awareness about pharmacists, and their potential role in the industry from both sides. I don't think pharmacists knew about it, and I don't think the industry really was thinking about it in that way, for at least for external stakeholder kind of engagement with physicians. So it's definitely changed a lot, from my perspective, over the last 10 to 20 years. And Parth, I'm curious from your standpoint, and I've never asked you this question. I've worked with you for a long time, but
Mm.
what have you gleaned? Right, you're not a healthcare professional. You don't come from the industry. What have you learned in all these years of being at the ACMA? What have you picked up on that was kind of surprising to you about the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare space? What kind of stuck out to you that you were like, wow, I didn't realize this?
So one of the things I've noticed a lot is that the life sciences industry is really behind when it comes to technology advancements. And really, if you look at some of the data points for, let's say, for example, machine learning, if we go back a few years, every single sector, for example, if you look at accounting, if you look at sales, all those sides, every one of them is focused on some part of machine learning, some part of natural language processing, all these AI technologies, tools that are available to utilize and really kind of bring up their field, right? Really, what I noticed when I got here was one of the the main things about the life sciences is there really wasn't any push for that at all. People were kind of stuck behind. They're good with their CSV files. They're okay with doing
Yeah.
stuff on Excel. And it's still that mentality, even with these newer technologies that are out. They feel comfortable enough to stick with what they know versus going with really what's out there, right? Taking the highway versus just staying on the local roads. So I think that honestly,
Yeah.
that has been one of the main things that I've noticed.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, one of the shockers for me when I went on the management consulting side and I started to go out to pharmaceutical companies, as you guys know, I worked for a big tech company out of Silicon Valley. And when I would go out to these companies, I was shocked at how much money they spent on the technology, but they actually never took the time to learn really how to properly implement it. So I think there's this idea, right? We have an idea that we want to implement the technology, but a lot of times we don't know how to make the best use of it. So I think you're right. And in general, I think within big pharma, especially, they're slower to adopt to newer concepts that kind of shift the paradigm. And we've seen that. I think, I mean, we'll talk about this later, but I think with AI, we're there where there is both an excitement about AI and what AI could mean for the pharma healthcare space, but there's also a level of trepidation. People are afraid. They're afraid about what that could mean in terms of taking away potentially from doctors the ability to make decisions. And I think there's some people that are scared of that. So we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
So, as you guys know, one of the things that I'm really passionate about when it comes to the work that we do at the ACMA is ultimately helping companies to make sure that they have some type of standard, and why having the standard is important, why it helps long term, it mitigates the risk and improves effectiveness, all that type of stuff. Why do you guys think today more than ever, you think about the year 2023, everything going on in the world, why do you guys think building trust with your customers, in this case for pharma, it's the doctors, why do you think that's so important? Because I have an idea and an answer in mind, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think. You guys are younger than me, right? And you have less tenure in the corporate world, and I'm sure you've heard and seen different things about corporate America, good, bad, the ugly, especially about pharma. From your standpoint and what you hear among your peers, why do you think that element of trust is so important, Kiana?
For me, the first thing that comes to mind is going to be TikTok. Not TikTok only by itself, but I just feel as if trust is a major factor no matter what sector you're in. If you're in pharma, if you're in food, whatever industry you're in, because social media information has always been, since internet came out, has been at your fingertips. But now we're dealing with misinformation, disinformation, and now as soon as one video goes viral, an entire population begins to question what has been tried and true, whether it's been science, whether it has been evidence-based medicine. As soon as one thing goes viral, everyone believes it. And so if you don't have that trust between yourself and your provider, your pharmacist, yourself and pharma and a physician, who are we really going to have, to be listed as our trusted voices? The common person, everyone is now going to social media and TikTok before they go to Google. So just really understanding what is true and having that discernment into deciding what is true and what is false.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Where I thought you were going to go with it was with what's happening now with TikTok, and
The
obviously
banning.
they were brought before, obviously, the federal government, and they were questioned on kind of what's happening there. I don't know if you guys caught the testimony in the hearing by the TikTok CEO. I thought some of the questions were funny, but I thought that it was, an eye opener from my standpoint, at least in terms of where the committee's head was at when they were asking these questions and what were they thinking about. And obviously, the question becomes ultimately is, can we trust this corporation? Now they're looking at it more from a spy perspective, right? Whether or not TikTok is spying on people. But I think your point about filtering information is a big one, because a lot of times the person with the loudest voice gets heard. Loudest voice here meaning most followers, most engagement, right? Most
Right.
subscribers. And oftentimes, unfortunately, not always the information that's coming out is accurate, right? It's not always correct. But that's what gets heard. And if it gets heard enough, people believe it, right?
Mhm.
And so I think really what you're talking about is this idea of misinformation. And I think this is why I'm a big believer that organizations, companies need to have direct kind of communication and outreach to their audience to help build that trust. I think that's paramount. Parth?
Yeah, I think from my end, trust in pharma is crucial, right? Because it's the foundation of the relationship between the industry and the public. And pharmaceutical companies really exist to serve the public by developing these drugs and medicine um, to really save lives. And without the public's trust, the industry would not be able to fulfill its mission and achieve its goal technically. So,
Right.
moreover, the trust in pharma is important because it's directly affecting patients and their lives, right? And that's really not the case at the moment with the ability to communicate on social media. As for example, myself, even anytime something happens to me, right? Something's wrong with my body. If I'm going to take a drug, my first instinct is let me check Reddit, see what other people have said, what other
Interesting.
symptoms they have gone through. Is this actually a good drug? Is there any hidden things that I need to know about? I don't trust the pharmaceutical companies enough to take their word. I would rather go to somewhere like Reddit and check it out there, right? So that misinformation part, that trust factor for younger people, I would say it's still not there.
So they don't still trust the industry. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah. I
Right.
would much rather take the advice. Maybe advice is too strong of a word, but more, the references that I saw on Reddit versus the actual pharmaceutical sites, to be honest.
And I think that's to some degree a millennial, right, kind of mentality, where you don't trust the company which has the source information. I think that's really eye opening. Why do you think that is, Parth? I'm just curious.
I
You know,
think
you're
it's for me, I think it's the narrative that pharma has built over time, right? If you think about pharmaceutical companies, one of the first things that a lot of millennials might say is they're scams, they're out for money, they're
right.
really just trying to get everything out of me by prescribing these drugs to me. That one, I don't even know if I truly need them,
Mm,
and two, really, what is it going to do to my body long term, right? Uh, sure, in the short term, it might get the problem away from me, but long term, what is it actually doing to me? So that's where that community aspect of going on Reddit or going to a forum where these people are also going through the same issues as you, and their main purpose isn't really to sell you anything, it's really just to share their experience with this drug. I think there it's much more relatable versus going to the pharmaceutical company. You know, at the end of the day, they have a business, they have an organization that they're really trying to get you to take this drug. So I think those are the two main differences from at least the younger side.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a valid point because ultimately it is a matter of life and death in a lot of cases, right? If you're taking a medication, if you're doing a procedure, you've got to be able to trust that this is something that's going to be okay long term. And do we have the data for that? I the other day I was talking to somebody whose daughter had just done a gastric bypass surgery, for weight loss, and a few weeks after that, she experienced really bad complications and symptoms. And you know, when you look at that area, for example, the long term data, we just don't have it. Same thing with COVID, the vaccine. We just don't have that data. It hasn't been around long enough to know long term what that's going to mean. And that, of course, can spark a lot of debate about whether or not the FDA should accelerate approvals, whether or not they should allow certain procedures and things like that. And I think the jury's still out, right? Because ultimately, oftentimes, if the patient is willing to take that risk to undergo weight loss surgery or to say, you know what, I want to take the vaccine, ultimately it's the decision of that patient, right? And we can get into obviously COVID and what happened there, and obviously in some cases where people were
Right.
threatened to lose their jobs if they didn't get the vaccine, so forth and so on. So, but in general, I think outside of that particular situation, um, it oftentimes boils down to the risk benefit, and patients have to obviously calculate that, and obviously that's predicated on a lot of trust
Yeah.
in the industry. So yeah, I agree.
And even to give an example for myself, right, going back to what you were just talking about, for myself, I had a lot of acid reflux, for example. And a while back, I was prescribed Nexium. And one of the things, if you know about Nexium, is that it's highly related to signs of stomach cancer, which,
Right.
again, none of this data was available. And it was freely prescribed as if it was the solution to this issue. And although it was a solution to this issue, there was no signs of that future outcomes, right? But people on Reddit, the sub community that I checked on before taking this medication, and this info was not provided by the doctor or whoever was that establishment. If I hadn't gone to subreddits to check on this drug before taking it, potentially I would have put myself at that risk as well, right? So another example there as well.
Right. I mean, I'm sure from Kiana's perspective as a healthcare professional, especially
as a
pharmacists,
pharmacist.
right?
Right.
Right. The pharmacist really should be giving out that information. But Kiana, I'm curious, what's your take on that? I mean, patients getting their own information, making their own decisions as to whether or not they're going to comply and adhere to medication.
Yeah, well, I think my question is more, or my answer was more so on the side of pharma and as a pharmacist as well, right? The example you use with the Nexium, instead of feeling siloed and you're going through this journey alone while you're prescribed that, your provider is there. But Will mentioned before that the pharmacist is seen as the most trusted healthcare professional. We're also the most accessible, right? We're in your grocery store, we're in your supermarkets. We're there as a resource. We have an entire patient counseling section. As a pharmacist, I won't go into depth into patient counseling for Nexium, but again, we have staff members, we have pharmacy technicians, pharmacists. Again, we're educators in this, and that's where we're not used sometimes by patients. You're there anyway, as on your way to grab your bologna. As you're grocery shopping, stop at your pharmacy and speak to your pharmacist and having that relationship. When answering the questions, about hopping to Reddit, I'm the first to say, if you know someone who has had it, get their patient experience, get their experience because they're in the same environment as you. But on the pharma side, they tap into that, right? They want that real world evidence, that real world experience that are by patients, and they do that in real world evidence, right? Real world data. Without going too in depth, pharma, they try and understand what patients are going through in the real world in order to provide that data or provide that information to patients, right? So pharma, we're trying, right? They're trying to understand by the patient, but is that accessible to the patient? I think that's where the gap is, right? Unless you're following the pharma page on Twitter or on LinkedIn, are you really getting that patient information, right? You want to see those studies. You want to see people's comments, what they've gone through. You understand that. But translating that over into pharma, sometimes, again, that's where that gap in knowledge goes.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think, that's always been a big debate about whether or not you want patients having access to too much information. Because again, there could be that Reddit subform could be misinformation. It could be just one
Right.
person's experience. You have to put the data into context. So, there's a lot that goes
All
into
right.
that in terms of interpreting data. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk a little bit about AI. Obviously, all the craze in the last few months has been around Chat GPT. Parth, why don't you, maybe for the folks out there that don't know what it is or how it works, explain what Chat GPT is, and then explain maybe different ways that AI can play a role in the industry in healthcare and pharma.
Yeah, absolutely. So ChatGPT, really the brains behind ChatGPT, which is the GPT model that came out a while ago already, but no one really knew about it like that because there wasn't any products that were built on it yet. But recently in October of 2022, I believe at the end, they came out with a interactive chat where anyone can really go on and ask any industry question, um, kind of a prompt related question, right? So and the AI in this case would return that answer as best as it can to its knowledge and what it's been trained on. And
Mhm.
one of the things to keep in mind is ChatGPT is not necessarily just looking at Google and trying to give you that answer, right? It's really been taught how to give that answer. So, for example, it was trained on millions and millions of YouTube videos. It was trained on hundreds and thousands of actual books, books even in pharmaceutical industries, biology books, huge, giant dictionaries, even, right? To really understand terminology. So that's really the concept of at least ChatGPT and how it's been used at the moment. In terms of where this can go for the life sciences industry, really it's an open-ended book, right? Within the life sciences, there's many areas. Um, where AI can potentially make a big impact. And I can give a few examples. One example could be drug discovery, where AI can help identify potential new drug candidates and
Mhm.
accelerate the drug development process, for example.
Right.
Another area could be personalized medication. So where AI can help is analyze large amount of patient data to identify individual treatment options. Another one to throw at you is AI can also be used for medical imaging to figure out diagnosis and treatment planning. So really, it's an open-ended book in terms of where AI can jump in and try to minimize some of the manual processes that we have, but at the same time help you make better decisions on available data for a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, even for doctor offices and all of that.
Do you think, Part, that there needs to be more education on how AI works? Like, I think people use the terms AI, machine learning, things like that, interchangeably, and I don't think people really understand the differences, right? And this is actually similar, even though it's a totally different area, Kiana, but in biologics and biosimilars. But do you feel like there needs to be more education, maybe at the schools, around what AI is, what machine learning is? Really have a more expanded curriculum for kids when they're younger and exposing them to things like coding and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's already been implemented in a lot of places where they're exposing younger kids to these ideas early on, right? Because if you really think about it, our generation is kind of behind when it comes to AI and stuff compared to millennials. Um, Really, those guys are really up in the front lines trying to figure out how all these things work, how they can better aid in terms of their jobs, their schools. They're trying to find every potential use when it comes to AI, right? So I would say it's definitely there. It can be much better, however. There can be a lot training for AI, I would say. It's a very complicated topic when it comes to neural networking, how some of the inner brains behind AI works. How do you go about training it? What's good data to give it? What's bad data to give? And then at the end of the
Right.
day, figuring out if the outputs you receive are morally correct as well, right? You can always get an answer, but is it and the answer might be right sometime as well, but is it the moral answer, right? For example, in ChatGPT, if you're asking moral questions, and I think there's a Stanford experiment that talks about this, about the train, right? If you have a train and you have two paths to it, one path has 5 workers on it, and the other one only has 1 worker on it, which way should the train go, right? And most of the time, AI still chooses the 5 option because it was more faster to go that way. So it's really trained
Oh,
on efficiency, but it doesn't understand the morality of, okay, you're also losing 5 people at the same time, versus if you would have went the slower way, you would have lost 1 person. So it's giving you answers, but it's not giving you answers as if you're thinking like a human, right?
right.
So
Well,
yeah,
and obviously, I think that's a good thing in the sense that human beings have a moral compass, right? I think that's something that probably a machine is not gonna, at least for now. I mean, who
yeah,
knows? What'll
yeah,
happen in the future, but for now, it's going to be difficult for a machine to kind of calculate that into the equation, right?
yeah.
To
I
point
think I
because
would
it's
give it
focusing on
about,
efficiency.
yeah, I think I would give it at minimum around 10 years for that, to get sentient enough to understand morals. I think it's already somewhat even there. One of the things that OpenAI CEO recently came out with was that they saw a sense of self-awareness inside of their bot as well, right? So it understood certain things that it wasn't even trained on. So
Mm,
really they're trying to figure out, how is that even possible that this AI is kind of understanding things without me even training it.
interesting.
So
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, let's switch to biologics and biosimilars. And Kiana, maybe as a pharmacist, you can explain to people out there that again maybe not as familiar with this space. We've heard a lot about it in the news, but what's a biologic? What's a biosimilar? Why is this year a big year for these types of drugs?
Yeah, so just let's compact all these years of science and of biologic and biosimilars into a few minutes. But biologics and biosimilars, they're agents similar to medications that we all know and love and are tried and true, but they are formulated in a completely different manner, right? So we're used to small molecules, they're identical copies. If everyone here, if Parth and Will took the same medication of what were traditionally small molecules, they'll be the exact same, right? They're identical no matter what brand you take, except for maybe a few additives may be different. But the active ingredient itself is the exact copy. It's the exact same molecule, right? With biologics and biosimilars, they're actually extracted from real living sources, right? They're coming from animals. They're being extracted from living microorganisms as well. And so replicating those, just as if I was to replicate Will's DNA, right? It's going to be different, right? You have what, 5 children, Will? They're
Mhm.
completely different. Right. Even
They
of
are.
course you had to use incorporate someone else's DNA. But if we were just
Right.
copy yours exactly the same, it will be different every time because it's really hard to make an exact copy of
Mhm.
a living organism, right? It's the same for medications. These medications are now on the up and up because one, we have a lot of therapeutic areas that are also on the up and up that are autoimmune diseases, right? Where our bodies attack themselves and they see some of our molecules in our body as enemies, right? So we're already tackling those autoimmune disorders such as oncology, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, but also because Humira, one of the top selling medications for decades, right? It has the most sales in the entire world, not just in the US, right? Globally. The patent for that drug is now expired, right? In
Mm,
2023.
right.
And of course, when you have that huge market share, everyone wants to have a piece, right? So now that that patent has expired, there are a lot of introducing biosimilars that are copies of that Humira medication. And so now we're having an influx of these Humira biosimilars or copies of Humira. And because of that, we're having increased competition. All eyes are on biologics and biosimilars. How are we going to pay for it? How will it affect our patients? How will it affect healthcare decision making on the provider level? Right? Every stakeholder involved is being affected by these changes. And so that's why it's a hot topic right now.
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously, you kind of touched on it, but biologics are expensive. and people are looking for cheaper alternatives, and so these can present potentially an option for them. All right, this has been great, a great conversation. I'm going to wrap it up with one last question to each of you. So if each of you could think about it for a second, think about who is your hero, who's somebody you look up to, that you just look to them for inspiration. It could be because of their work ethic, their moral character, whatever it is. But I'm just out of curiosity, who's someone you look up to, who's a hero to you? So maybe I'll start with Parth.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Really, I think the best way to answer is kind of go through a little bit of my background and get to that answer. But I grew up in the inner city of Passaic, New Jersey, on the border of Patterson. And if you know where that is, you know that it's not a good area. And the high school that I went to, I think it was like 23 out of 100 in terms of the readiness score, right? So when it comes to being prepared for
Wow.
college, it is little to nothing. But despite all that, I can say that I'm at a good point in my career. And the reason why is because I knew I had to be different. I grew up around people who were either unemployed, making money illegally, or doing pretty much nothing. And
Mm,
it would have been so easy to just slack off and do the same, right? It would have been like a snap of the finger if I really wanted to do that. But I really couldn't do that. And that goes to my immigrant parents being one of the reasons, sacrificing really everything to give their children a better life, right? That narrative of the American immigrant parent story. And a lot of the second generation kids would understand this. It's a story of selflessness, hard work,
mm.
determination.
Right.
And my parents were no exception. They left behind everything. They knew, right? They left their families, their friends, everything that they had. And really, I couldn't let them down in terms of what they sacrificed. And again, the second person that I would say is on this call with me, and that's Dr. Solomon. He's
Oh, thank
been
you,
a
Parth.
real effort on my career. And we started off as a very small company, and looking at where we are right now, it's a it's life and change, right? I would say. One of the things that I think I really admire about Dr. Solomon is his dedication, his persistence when it comes to some of the things that he wants. Right, when he wants something, he goes out of his way to make sure that he always gets it, and I think I really admire that. One of the things that I set myself apart when I was growing up in high school and colleges. Again, it was very easy to slack off if I really wanted to, but I made the commitment to surround myself by the right people. And one of those right people was Dr. Solomon. He gave me opportunities. I would say he believed in me a lot as well, even when I came up with ideas that seemed ridiculous at times. There were some ideas where I'm sure he was like, there's no way we can accomplish this as a small company. Even some of the AI stuff that we have in talks at the moment, I'm sure in his head he's probably thinking, well, we're just a few people and there's larger companies doing this as a whole, right?
Right.
But he always he always gives the opportunity to go for it, which is very inspiring and very motivational as well, right? Having someone that believes in your work, someone that really believes in what your potential is as well. So I would say Dr. Solomon, along with my parents and some of the dedication that they showed, both are a huge impact on myself, even at a level of a hero, you can say.
That's really nice. Well, just so everybody knows, I did not know Parth was going to say that.
Yeah.
So that was not planned, but thank you, Parth. That's really very kind of you. I mean, I definitely enjoyed working with you. I think you're extremely bright, and I really appreciated what you said about being a first generation American, having immigrant parents, and also not having that sense to not let them down because they've tried so hard and sacrificed so much to give you that better life. And I totally can relate to that. I also grew up in the inner city. I grew up not too far from Passaic in Jersey City in New Jersey, and it was a similar situation, right? My parents were really dirt poor to the point that both of my parents they they had to work pretty much, 12-hour shifts, and they would leave me with my grandmother. And, she pretty much was the one that raised me for the first 8, 9 years of my life. And you learn a lot when you observe that, when you see that. You learn a lot about the value of hard work, and you see things differently. So I definitely appreciate that. So thank you. Kiana, who's your hero?
So my hero is actually my sister, and she's actually
Nice.
younger than me. We're 14
Oh.
months apart, so we're still very close in age, but she's younger than me. So hopefully she doesn't see this video. But I'm supposed to be the one that sets an example. But the reason why I'd say she's my hero is just, well, it really is explained by what she does. She's a nurse. She's specifically a labor and delivery nurse. And if you know anything about nurses, they're all the same, right? They're all very solution focused, no matter what it may be. If someone made our order wrong, if she's advocating for her patient, she goes about it the exact same way. We're here now. What's the solution? How can we get there, right? And how she navigates that process and that journey, whatever obstacles are there, whatever, bad things she's hearing in her ear, whatever it may be, she'll just jump over them like with grace, right? So that she can get to the end solution. She's the only person really in this entire world who knows exactly what I went through, through life growing up. We grew up the exact same. We had the same parents. We went to the same school, but we're still completely different, right? She's the complete opposite, but we have the same goals in the end. And how, again, she approaches situations, how she approaches our relationship is the exact same way of how she approaches her patients, right? She pushes them. She's very dedicated and determined. She's like, it hurts now, but I promise we're going to get there to the destination. Again, that's just that nurse mentality that they have. We're going to get there to the end. So that positivity that she has, sometimes it's negative to me, but again, that will that she has in order to get to the solution and to advocate for her patients, no matter what they look like or what they're going through, is always very important to me. Again, she's an advocate to fighting physicians, to fighting those doctors, to fight for her patients that look like her, right? We know what goes on in the healthcare system, but she advocates and she pushes for them like nobody's business. She does the same for her sisters. I've had in my head since I was young that my parents, they tell me, be an example for your sisters, be an example for your sisters. And again, we grew up the exact same way. So the best way I could be an example to her is to have that same mindset, right? To get to that end, no matter what we're going through, we're going to get through it. And I see that again every day in our relationship, in her stories that she tells me from her patient experiences, from top to bottom. She's the exact same, very solution focused, driven, passionate about what she does. And we're going to get there. That mindset.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like she's a woman with a lot of integrity, and I think that's really hard to find, especially when you look at people who work with patients and really care about their patients and have that passion and compassion. That's beautiful, especially in that area as well, labor and delivery area. So that's great. I mean, you guys, I learned a lot about you today and about your backgrounds, the things that I did not know. So for me, it was really interesting. I hope the audience finds it interesting and, gets to know the ACMA team a little bit better. One of the things that I'm really proud of with all of our ACMA's team members and staff is everybody here is really dedicated to the work that we do and loves what we do and believes in the mission of raising the bar for the healthcare space and the pharma industry. So it's been really a great journey. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Parth. Thank you, Kiana, for being guests today on the show. Hope you guys enjoy this. Be sure to subscribe, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thank you.